So in general, I find the scope of work, that's kind of the tedious part. That's the hardest part. So once you have a quality scope of work, you can start getting into the estimation part. This part might be harder for engineers than others. This scope of work, the work hour estimate that you're putting together, it's not really, you're not working for a right answer. This is an art, not a science. So it could adjust. It's not black and white. You can't just pick a number and plug it in. And as your project is changing, your contract, the scope of work, and the work hour estimation may change as well. If your scope changes as you've started to develop the project, you'll probably have to go back and update that scope of work and the work hour estimate. And then likely that'll have an impact on your schedule. There is no easy out to a work hour estimate. So you can't just apply a percentage and move on, especially if we're working with a consultant team. That's not going to get us to be on the same page of what's expected. You can use this whole process as a chance to build your team and work on getting on the same page. So especially if you have a consultant, if you start right off the bat agreeing on what the scope of work is and what you're trying to accomplish, that's going to make the whole project a lot smoother. And you are going to be able to have better conversations about what's expected. One of the most important things needed when you're doing this work hour estimation is documenting those assumptions. So I said that before. I know I'm repeating myself, but we want to make sure that all of that is in place in case there's questions later. So as you're talking with your specialty units, maybe it's not as formal as an assumption, but I want to hold on to comments if they seem important. And then when you're sitting down with your consultant to negotiate, bringing those assumptions to the table might help you come to a good middle ground. Now, if the consultant has lower numbers than you do and you need to figure out why, starting to look at both of your assumptions will help you figure out where the difference is initiated from. So to develop the work hour estimation, you're going to take all of the activities that you identified when you were developing your scope of work and start adding hours. Again, this is not the project manager doing it in a silo. You really want to engage your specialty units. They have a much better idea of what hours it's going to take them to perform their tasks. Once you have all of that gathered and put together, you'll perform the quick checks. This is a really high-level check to make sure everything feels reasonable. And then sit down with your RE or your region work hour estimation SME and get their feedback. Really talk it through and make sure that you've got good assumptions and you've caught all of the tasks that you needed. I think I just inadvertently covered this early, didn't I? So that quick check, we have a few examples in the job aid. So I think when we're done here, you'll be able to access that either in SOC Learns or on the TETP website. It should be available in SOC Learns. This is, again, not black and white. So you're really looking for, does this overall work hour estimate seem too high or low? Is it going to meet the schedule that you have in place? Are the right people doing the right work? And to the hours, is there a peak of geotech hours when there's no geotech work? Like, you just want to make sure that the hours seem reasonable with your scope of work. The quick check methods that we've identified are estimating hours per construction cost, hours per sheet of design, labor classification percentages, and then full-time equivalency. After that quick check, that's when you're going to sit down with your RE or your work hour estimation SME. When you have so you've done your pre-scoping, now you've got your work hour estimation together, you've added hours, you'll have a scoping session, probably bringing in your consultant at this time as a joint effort. This is a list of possible people that you should be inviting. Again, we know that each project is unique, so your outside stakeholders may look a little different than what we've got here, but I think this is really going to help, spur ideas of who you should be inviting to your scoping meeting. For a successful scoping meeting, you'll want to make sure that you've got your location map, plan and profile, any accident history, multimodal information for the corridor, environmental considerations, and then organize that into agenda. You'll want to share this information in advance of the meeting, enough in advance that your teams can do a little research and bring questions and comments to the scoping session. And here, while you're scoping, you may find that you're going to refine that scope of work that you initially had and may have some adjustments to make to your initial scope of work. So negotiations are going to be occurring somewhere around that, in between that pre-scoping and the scoping meeting. You'll want to sit down with your consultants, and really the first step is getting on the same page. Guidance from CDOT says that the RE will conduct negotiations with the consultants. We really recommend that the project manager join the meeting so they can build their negotiation skills and understand the process and know what to expect. I think that it's pretty typical at CDOT for the more experienced project managers to conduct the negotiations themselves, not the RE. So you've had your scoping meeting, you've got your tasks, you're going to develop a worksheet. And this may look a little bit different than your initial work. You're going to want to sit down with your consultants and make sure that you're looking at the same tasks. We really want to compare apples to apples. Once you've got that worksheet agreed to, you're going to just fill in hours. The CDOT project manager and the consultant will use that to fill in hours. And then utilizing that worksheet is where you're going to start your negotiations. You want to look for those big differences. Start by looking at that. It's more important to focus on the big differences than to look at each individual item. Start with the big items and start to come together from those big items towards the smaller items. You need to agree on the assumptions so that you know that your consultant and you are looking at the same work and assuming that the same risks are in place. So if you have risks, you'll want to share with your consultant as well. When you get to the end, the work hour estimate that you have will likely be different than what you started with. That's okay. You'll document along the way any changes that you made and why you made that changes. Interpreted scope differently than the consultant, added hours because we saw these 3 things were needed. So just making sure that you're keeping track of those changes along the way. So this is where I was kind of leading us before, where we want to make sure that you're comparing the same information, a real apples to apples comparison. of the project. You need to make sure you've agreed on the scope, the tasks. You've got this worksheet that has the tasks that you've all agreed on. And then looking at the personnel classifications. Does CDOT believe an EIT or a tech can do the work, and the consultant is suggesting a PE2 level do the work? That's a big variance. So making sure that you've got the same classifications. We really recommend trying to group personnel into similar categories. So I think here on our next sheet, as we're trying to consider what level of individual is doing the work, we want to compare our CDOT classifications to the consultant classifications. So we might have a PE1, could be an EPST 1, 2, or 3 as the design engineer. Project managers are a higher level, PE1s, EPM2s, maybe even our PE2s. Senior project managers, now we're working our way up into our executive region management, and then principal matches with our executive management. Negotiations can have maybe brings an idea to your mind of really fighting over concepts. So we want to take the emotion out of the negotiations. We know that we can only control our own emotions, but what can help when we're looking at our counterpart is trying to understand where their emotions are coming from. If they seem angry or fearful, is this the outcome of this negotiation? Could it affect the livelihood of their business? If they're a contractor, could this really put a dent in their profit for the year? Where are those emotions coming from? Are they nervous that this change is going to make the project unachievable for them in the time that we've agreed to? We want to think about what's behind that and try and pull the emotion out and make it more logical. Put yourself in the other party's shoes. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on the problem, not the person. My example here would be, you don't want to say Hilary Hawthorne's too stubborn to negotiate with. Well, possibly, but the problem really is that we don't agree on the hours it's going to take to develop the bridge sheets. So really want to take it away from stubborn Hilary and really down to the actual problem. We need to develop bridge sheets, and we don't agree on how much time it's going to take. Recognize the importance of saving face. This one is really about maintaining relationships. We work with many different contractors and consultants at CDOT, but the reality is the community is small, and we will likely be working again with different teams. And so sometimes it's important to give a little grace to the other party in order to save a relationship instead of being so hard-lined. So if it's not going to impact the project in a big way, if we're still able to keep our commitments to the taxpayer, I really think you're looking for that win-win negotiation and maintaining those relationships along the way. We're finally getting to the good stuff. You've got a scope of work, you've got a work hour estimation, we're going to add costs, we can do a budget request, and we can finally start work, right? So what we were negotiating on before were work hours. We weren't negotiating costs. We were simply negotiating work hours and then the personnel doing the work. And now that we've added cost, we still need to make sure that this project can be completed within our budget. So you'll add cost to your hours. The consultant will also add cost to their hours. You want to review that ICE with your region SME or your RE. and then do a gut check. Is this within our budget? Are we able to afford this, so to speak? And then you'll need to compare it to the consultant's cost estimate. The guidance we have is that the consultant's cost estimate should be within 10% of CDOT's cost estimate. This doesn't mean that we have to concede to one side or the other. This really goes back to our negotiation. We want to document any changes. So if we need to adjust to meet in the middle or to meet within this 10%, we really just need to document how we got there and why. It's preferable if we do it in the work hours than waiting until we have dollars. Really want to document getting within hours of each other. All right, once you have that ICE put together, hopefully your task order gets through within, a month or two, and you can actually start your work and get moving. This course that we put together, we know it's just a start to a bigger exercise. So I want to make sure that you know that there is training and support available outside of this course. To meet our WIGs, we're asking project managers who manage task orders to take this course, and then the Developing a Scope of Work e-learning, that's in SOC Learns. And then we have some additional courses that I think really complement these courses well. There's a negotiations e-learning and a professional services contracting and task orders learning. So that one was developed with Pele's group and really gets you through that process of executing a task order. Again, I want to remind you that each region has a SME, and they're there as a resource for you and can really help troubleshoot the ins and outs of developing a work hour estimate. One other item I'm just going to mention in passing, I manage the Program Reporting and Transparency Office, and we've been developing an Excel-based work hour estimation tool that's really intended to help our staff with less experience start to put hours to tasks and get to that full work hour estimate. So if you're interested in that, we'll be getting that out for public consumption probably this week or next, and then we'll start some trainings within the region. So look for information on that as well. And I'm going to flip through a couple slides here just so you can see what the job aids look like that we've gathered for you. We have some discussion on assumptions and documenting those assumptions for project management, the quick check methods with examples. So we mentioned there was 4 different quick check methods. That's a little bit of a tongue twister, quick check. And how to get through those quick checks. Again, this isn't a shortcut, it's just looking for reasonableness. This is a full-time equivalency, and then a sample project task worksheet.